Because I had a flare-up of my illness at that time. Your illness? Chase nodded. Ever since I got sick, I've had to rely on medication to keep it under control. I need to take medicine every 3 to 4 hours. Unfortunately, just at that time, I had a flare-up and found my medicine bottle empty, so I had to go home first, take my medicine, and then rush over here. Why did you walk the first time you came, but chose to ride a bike the second time? To save time. I didn't want to miss the opportunity. I had been following Li Gang every day for the past week and found that he only comes home on weekends. So, I believed he would be home this weekend too, and I didn't want to miss it, or else I'd have to wait another week. Cars can't enter the neighborhood at night, so I rode an electric bike. When you killed Li Gang and his family, why did you stop again under surveillance? Simple, on one hand, to tell you that it was still me who did it. On the other hand, I was worried that the surveillance on Anil Road might not be clear enough due to lighting issues, and you wouldn't be able to determine my height. The streetlight next to the surveillance camera in the neighborhood provides very good lighting, so I plan to take another photo to give you a clearer view. Greg Wang pursed his lips. He found no obvious flaws in Chase Chen's description of his second crime, so he could only say, "We will reinvestigate what you said. If it was indeed you who came and went alone, we will definitely find the electric bike you mentioned." Chase Chen smiled. "Of course, you will find it. Was it you who disguised as a milkman the third time when you killed Vincent Fan and his family? Who else could it be? But the milkman on the last morning was clearly thinner, not at all like you." Chase Chen said, "That can't be right. It was indeed me who did it. Maybe the clothes I wore that time were tighter. I remember it was snowing that day." Greg Wang found it hard to refute this answer. After all, the person in the surveillance seemed thinner than Chase Chen, but the person in the surveillance didn't show his face, and there was no evidence to say it definitely wasn't Chase Chen. Perhaps, as he said, it was because of the tight clothes. After more questioning, they still couldn't get any information about another accomplice. Chase Chen's answers all seemed reasonable. Greg Wang had no choice but to stand up, instruct his subordinates to take Chase Chen down to the single room for custody, and considering that Chase Chen might indeed be sick, he instructed them not to touch him and to meet his physiological needs for the time being. Greg Wang needed to discuss with George Xu what to do next. He had thought that capturing Chase Chen would clarify everything, but now, after a series of questions, the case seemed even more complicated. Back in the office, Greg Wang told George Xu about the interrogation. After listening, George Xu frowned. "Does this kid really have a brain tumor?" Greg Wang shook his head helplessly. "I don't know if it's true or not, but it seems like it from the way he talks." George Xu thought for a moment and called Dr. Chen. "Is the evidence collection done?" "It's basically done. The house has been sealed off, and we've assigned 2 officers to keep watch. The follow-up evidence investigation is still ongoing. Speed up the work. By the way, did you find Chase Chen's medical records?" "Medical records? Let me check." Dr. Chen made a call and then replied, "There are 2 medical records, one from a hospital in the United States and one from the Provincial Cancer Hospital, stating that Chase Chen has a malignant tumor in his brain, along with CT scans." George Xu paced back and forth, then said, "No wonder this guy dared to commit such a big crime. He knew he didn't have long to live." Greg Wang asked, "How should we continue the interrogation?" George Xu pondered for a moment and said, "We still need to interrogate him, but not too harshly, just keep it within limits. This case has caused a lot of uproars, and the senior leadership must get a complete picture of the case. In the end, it will definitely go to court, and we can't let anything happen to him before the trial." "All right," Greg Wang sighed, "I'll think of something. It's best if he cooperates. If not, we'll find other ways." Dr. Chen said, "When we searched the house this morning, we encountered something." "What?" Greg Wang asked. On the top floor balcony, there was a large iron barrel containing a bunch of partially burned miscellaneous items. At a preliminary glance, there were 2 toothbrushes, a few teacups, pillowcases, duvet covers, bed sheets, towels, and several pairs of socks, etc. It seems that Chastien burned these items this morning, then poured water on them and mixed in some acidic liquid. George Shu puzzled, just these items? Yes, that's it. Why would he burn these items? Dr. Chen shook his head. Greg Wang thought for a moment, then his eyes lit up. He almost fooled us. He must have an accomplice. Oh, how so? George Shu asked. These items are all personal belongings of one person. Old Chen, if there were hair fibers or anything that could be tested for DNA on the toothbrushes and towels, would they be untestable after he did this? If there are still remaining hairs, it should be possible to test, but the towels, duvet covers, and other flammable items were almost completely burned, leaving only the toothbrushes and teacups which are not easily burned. Moreover, after burning, he also put them in acidic liquid, so it's likely that skin flakes, saliva, etc., can't be detected at all. Greg Wang took a deep breath. Looking at the situation, the accomplice might have stayed in Chastien's house for a long or short period. George Shu frowned deeply. Besides, to prove that Chastien had an accomplice, we could only rely on the footprints in the room. But this morning, we didn't pay attention to this at all. With so many people walking into his house, the footprints on the floor are all messed up. Greg Wang said, even if we had paid attention to the footprints this morning, it wouldn't have helped. Just based on footprints, he could easily claim they were from someone else who came in, like a repairman, and we would have a hard time verifying it. George Shu thought for a while and said, for now, we still need to get him to confess his accomplice. One thing you didn't ask him, what was his motive for the crime? If he doesn't have an accomplice, and he didn't have much of a relationship with Jasmine Gone, where did the motive for the crime come from? Also, the evidence team needs to speed up their work. The more detailed the situation you find, the less Chastien can pretend. By the way, Greg, after the interrogation, arrange for Chastien to be taken to the hospital for another scan to see if he really has a brain tumor. Also, ask the doctor if he really has a brain tumor, whether we can't touch him. In the interrogation room, Greg Wang interrogated Chastien for the second time that day. We found an iron barrel on your balcony. He carefully observed Chastien's expression. Chastien's face was impassive. Oh, yes, it contained 2 toothbrushes, a water cup, a teacup, 4 towels, a set of 4 bedding items, and probably a few pairs of socks. And then? Greg Wang sneered, you're quite thorough in your confession. Chastien calmly said, since I let you catch me, I haven't planned to continue hiding anything. Whatever you want to ask, I'll cooperate with you. We checked, and you burned the toothbrushes and towels from your bathroom in the iron barrel. Why? Chastien answered without hesitation, I burned them this morning, and then poured some dilute sulfuric acid I had left over. We know. I'm asking why you did this? The toothbrushes and towels had my DNA on them, not just those, but before I left home this morning, I also roughly mopped the floor, cleaning up the hair and footprints. Of course, I probably didn't clean it thoroughly, but with limited time, I could only clean up as much as possible to avoid leaving my DNA. When I left home this morning and saw your wanted notice, I didn't expect you to trace it to me. I could only follow the worst-case scenario, clean up the DNA and flee. During the escape, I planned to find someone with a similar body shape to me, then kill them, ignite them to destroy part of their appearance, and fake it as if I committed suicide out of guilt. If you don't have my DNA, based on the documents and other clues left beside the deceased, you would conclude that the dead person was me. Greg Wang's eyes twitched. Was this guy destroying DNA not to hide an accomplice, but to kill someone else and fake the scene? How cold-blooded. But this was just his statement, maybe he was lying? He continued to ask, but in the end, you didn't do that and came to the police car yourself. Chastien smiled calmly, that's because Zhang Honba died, and all my plans for murder were already completed. There was no need to flee. I originally thought you had issued a citywide wanted notice, and I wouldn't have longed to escape, let alone have the opportunity to kill the last person. But after disguising myself a bit, I found that I wasn't recognized walking on the street. When I passed by Zhang Hongbao's company nearby, I decided to try my luck, and in the end, I easily succeeded. Since my last target had been killed, there was no need for me, a person with only half a year left to live, to kill an innocent person to help myself escape. I've lived enough, made enough, one life for 7 dog lives, not a loss. Greg Wang's face turned cold. The criminal in front of him was a cold-blooded psychopathic killer. He really wanted to rush up and give him a beating to curb his arrogant demeanor. He clenched his fist tightly, holding back his anger, and said, "What did you do all this for?" Chastin asked in surprise, "You still haven't figured out why I killed those people?" Greg Wang questioned with suspicion, "Was it for Jasmine Gone? But besides being classmates, what other relationship did you have with her?" Chastin lowered his head in silence for a moment, then looked up at Greg Wang again, his eyes slightly red. "Jasmine Gone was once my girlfriend. Do you think I should kill those people?" Greg Wang was shocked. "What? You're saying Jasmine Gone was your girlfriend?" He shook his head. "Impossible." Chastin let out a bitter laugh. "You don't believe it either, huh? Although she was only my girlfriend for a month, I will never forget her. To this day, I am unmarried and have never been in another relationship, all because of her." Greg Wang shook his head repeatedly. "Impossible, we've already investigated your classmates, and no one ever mentioned you were Jasmine Gone's boyfriend." Chastin said disappointedly, "Do you also think I'm not good-looking enough for Jasmine Gone?" Greg Wang looked him over, seeing a face that looked 50 though he was not yet 40, bald, with a flat nose, small eyes, overweight, dark-skinned, and short. Even looking at photos of Chastin from his student days 10 years ago, he was quite unattractive, certainly not a match for Jasmine Gone. Greg Wang didn't say anything, seemingly not denying it. Chastin snorted with a laugh, "You don't have to say it, I also think I'm not worthy of her, and no one would believe I could be Jasmine Gone's boyfriend." In college, Jasmine Gone was the beauty of our chemistry department, universally acknowledged as a beauty, and many people liked her. Our class leader, Liu Lu, later successfully won her heart, and they started dating. But it didn't last long, and Jasmine Gone broke up with him soon after, the specific reasons I'm still not very clear about. Anyway, she was in a bad mood during that time, and that's when I entered her life. In fact, from the first moment I saw her, I fell in love with her, not just her appearance, but her temperament, personality, every smile, all so beautiful. But I knew I was short and ugly, always unnoticed. How could I dare to like her? But I couldn't control my feelings, I loved her too much. You can't understand how someone who seems so insignificant in the eyes of others could love someone who seems like a goddess. I loved her, but I also didn't dare let others know I loved her. People would definitely laugh at me, saying a toad wants to eat swan meat. So, all along, I could only love her silently in my heart, paying attention to everything about her. Until she broke up with Liu Lu, I couldn't control myself anymore, secretly expressed my love to her, and a miracle actually happened. I'm not narcissistic, I've always been very clear that she agreed to accept my love because she was emotionally down after the breakup. Maybe she was giving up on herself, or maybe just looking for a new experience. Anyway, she agreed. However, this was only a verbal agreement. She never held hands with me, let alone any other intimate actions, and she didn't tell anyone about our relationship, treating me like a friend, confiding in me. But this was enough for me. It already gave me the happiest and most satisfying time of my life. Although less than a month later she told me she was too selfish, maybe just wanted a friend who could listen to her without spreading the word, our so-called boyfriend-girlfriend relationship also came to an end. I wasn't too upset. By that time I had already thought it through clearly. I wasn't worthy of her, and she didn't really accept me. But the life of that month is my most beautiful memory. I will never forget that happy feeling. After graduating from college, even though I was in the United States, I always missed her in my heart. When I learned she got married, I was happy for her. When I learned she had a child, I was as happy as if I were the child's father. But who knew one day she would end up with her family destroyed? When I learned of He Jian's death, I wanted to return to the country to visit her, comfort her, but before I could return, this happened. Can I not hate? At that time, I was shaking with hatred, then later passed out, went to the hospital for a checkup, only to find out I had developed a brain tumor, and it was already in the middle to late stages when discovered. The doctor said it might be related to my many years of work. My profession is chemical research and development. I need to contact various chemicals every day, also inhaling some harmful components. You can tell from my appearance, over time, cancer cells were born in my brain. But it was discovered too late. Treatment wasn't very valuable. The private doctor suggested I spend my remaining days living any life I wanted. Do you know, learning that I only had 6 months to a year to live, I almost curled up at home for a week, utterly despondent. But a week later, I figured it out. Originally my greatest hope was to see the person I liked living happily. Now the person I liked was gone, and my life was counting down. Might as well use my remaining time to do something she wanted to do, but didn't finish. Fortunately, the tumor occurred in a part of the brain that isn't the cerebral cortex, otherwise my thinking would be impaired. How could I think of this series of crimes? The tumor temporarily only affects my autonomic nerves. I've been controlling it with medication, so I successfully killed those people. After hearing his story, Greg Wang fell into deep thought, finally understanding why Chase-Chin did what he did. He was usually busy with work, paid little attention to his family, but he also deeply loved his wife and children. He could empathize with Chase-Chin's state of mind. When you love someone deeply, to the core, your greatest wish is to always see the other person living happily, even if she marries someone else. But when someone shatters your wish in an instant, you can no longer control yourself. Moreover, Chase-Chin learned that he only had 6 months to a year to live. He had nothing left to worry about. If someone killed my wife and children, would I also seek revenge crazily, like Chase-Chin? This question flashed through Greg Wang's mind. He didn't dare to think further. Such a thing couldn't possibly happen. Everyone has the potential to become crazy, it just depends on what they lose. That day, Chase-Chin went to the County People's Hospital for a checkup, and was diagnosed with a brain tumor. The county bureau called the provincial cancer hospital to check the records, and found that Chase-Chin went to the cancer hospital for a checkup the day after he returned to the country. The doctor suggested chemotherapy, otherwise he could only live for a year at most. He said he would think about it, bought several bottles of the same medicine he brought from the United States, and then never went to the hospital again. The results showed that Chase-Chin indeed had a terminal illness. To avoid his sudden condition, during his interrogation, they could not use the usual methods. Of course, his having a terminal illness also fit the police's expectations. This way the motive for the crime was easier to understand. When the person you love the most dies, and you yourself don't have much time left, the extreme him chose to seek crazy revenge by killing. But regarding that ambiguous accomplice, Greg Wang and George Zhu were at a loss. Whether he really had an accomplice, it was uncertain. Because the explanations in Chase-Chin's confession seemed reasonable, the police had suspected accomplice crime from the beginning. Lacking sufficient evidence to support it, it could only be said to be Greg Wang's wishful thinking at the beginning. The people tracking Xander Su reported back that Xander Su had shown no abnormalities recently. The monitored phone calls also showed he had never contacted Chase-Chin. His previous confession of 2 phone contacts with Chase-Chin a few months ago completely matched the facts, and Chase-Chin's online chat records in recent months were also blank, including before. Indeed, as he said, they hadn't contacted much over the years. Currently, it seems that Xander Su is unrelated to the case, and has not been in contact with Chase-Chin, but whether this is truly the case, Greg Wang still had doubts. The next day, the county criminal investigation team's follow-up investigation work basically had a clue. Combined with Chase-Chin's own confession, the entire crime process could be reconstructed. Before each murder, Chase-Chin went through meticulous planning, scouting, and preparation. Before acting on Jiang Xiaobing, he observed from a distance for many days, and when tracking, he didn't follow the whole way, but tracked in sections. For example, tracking him for a stretch today, tomorrow lying in wait on another stretch to continue tracking him, so the tracking process was never discovered. At the same time, before making his move, Chase-Chin conducted a detailed survey of all possible routes Jiang Xiaobing could take, devising different corpse disposal plans. That night, Jiang Xiaobing entered Anil Road alone. Chase-Chin seized the opportunity to follow, and found that there were no other vehicles or pedestrians on the road at that time, so he took out a medical anesthesia gun, and as he passed by Jiang Xiaobing, suddenly injected a syringe filled with high-purity nicotine into Jiang Xiaobing's neck, quickly poisoning him to death. Before acting, Chase-Jin turned on the recording switch on his phone, recording Jiang Xiaobing's last sounds, preparing for the later kidnapping and murder. Afterward, Chase-Jin followed the predetermined corpse disposal plan for that section of the road. Using the special terrain of Anil Road, he helped Jiang Xiaobing up to a residential building nearby, at the staircase corner between the first and second floors, threw the body through the window to the abandoned green space behind the house. After doing all this, Chase-Jin deliberately made a middle-finger gesture under surveillance, leaving a shadow for the police. The clues left to the police were only his height and build, using the trick of height-increasing shoes, leading the police to look for someone between 170 to 174 centimeters tall, but never imagining the actual perpetrator was only 165 centimeters tall. After leaving Anil Road, Chase-Jin avoided road surveillance, quickly returned to his car, drove to the green space, and took away Jiang Xiaobing's body. The next morning, Chase-Jin began the kidnapping plan. The night before notifying the reservoir, he arranged the box and sinking the body to the bottom of the lake. During the second crime, Chase-Jin used the same segmented tracking method to continuously follow Su-Yao and her son Li, mastering their daily routines. On the day Li returned home, Chen first walked into the community, planning to hang a spray bottle filled with highly toxic hydrogen cyanide on the iron gate and hide a step away to operate the remote control at the right moment. However, his illness flared up at this time, and finding the medicine bottle empty, he had no choice but to quickly leave the community. After going home to take his medicine, eager to seize the opportunity of the week, he rode his electric scooter back quickly. At this time, Li had not yet returned home. After Chen hung up the spray bottle, Li got out of his car and opened the door. Chen operated the remote control, and a large amount of hydrogen cyanide was sprayed out, causing Li to die quickly from inhalation. Afterward, Chen checked to make sure no one was around, came to the door, and to avoid leaving fingerprints, wrapped his fingers with his clothes to press the doorbell, luring Su-Yao out. When Su-Yao came to the courtyard and saw Li lying on the ground outside the door, she didn't have time to think and ran over to open the door. Chen took the opportunity to press another button on the remote control for the spray bottle, poisoning Su-Yao to death. The third crime was a great test for Chase-Jin. Because Vincent Fan's family lived in the highly secure official community of Dijingyuan, and Vincent Fan, being the head of the police station, was more alert than the victims of the previous two crimes. Moreover, he was aware of the case details and might be more vigilant, making the success rate of setting up a device for the crime not high. Chen bought a telescope and went to the mountain behind the community. After observing for several days, he confirmed Vincent Fan's exact address and saw that milkmen and newspaper deliverers could enter the community without registration. To his surprise, he saw that Vincent Fan's family had ordered milk. Therefore, Chen disguised himself as a milkman to enter the community for reconnaissance. After analysis, he thought it was feasible to replace the milk box and add arsenic trioxide to the milk. Accordingly, he entered the community and replaced Vincent Fan's milk box shortly after the real milkman had left the community. That day, Vincent Fan and his wife died from the high content of arsenic trioxide in the milk, beyond rescue. The last crime, which was yesterday, saw Chase-Jin going out early in the morning and seeing the police on the street. Suspecting that his identity had been exposed, he saw his own wanted poster when passing by the notice board. He quickly returned home, burned items containing his DNA, and swiftly mopped the floor to reduce as much as possible the remnants of hair and other items carrying his DNA in the house. One of his plans was to destroy the DNA and then kill a middle-aged man with a similar build while on the run, then set the body on fire to create the illusion of fleeing from crime, fearing arrest, and ultimately committing suicide by taking poison and setting himself on fire, to make the police close the case sooner and stop pursuing him. His second plan was to continue his crime spree and kill the last person on his list, Zhang Hongba. So, after cleaning the room of DNA, he took the tools for killing Zhang Hongba, put on elevator shoes, a wig, glasses, and a beard, and left the house after applying makeup. After arriving on the street, he found that no one paid attention to him. Even when passing by the police, he was not discovered. He gradually relaxed, thinking about executing the last part of his plan. He went to Zhang Hongba's company, disguised as a court official, and waited. After Zhang Hongbao arrived in the meeting room, Chase-Chin closed the door, suddenly pulled out a replica gun, and declared himself as the person the police were looking for, telling Zhang Hongbao not to move. Knowing that this person had committed crimes 3 times in a row and seeing the replica gun in his hand, which he thought was real, Zhang Hongbao was extremely frightened and dared not move. Chin controlled him on the sofa, held the gun to threaten him from behind, and quickly pulled out a syringe filled with high-purity nicotine, injecting it into Zhang Hongbao's neck. Although Zhang Hongbao struggled fiercely, even pushing Chin down and tearing his clothes, Chin fought with all his might, and within seconds, the nicotine took effect on Zhang Hongbao's brain, rendering him unconscious, never managing to escape the meeting room. Thus, until Chase-Chin left the company, no one discovered that Zhang Hongbao was dead. After leaving the company, Chin thought about having completed all his plans and, with not much life left, saw no need to kill an innocent person for half a year of freedom. So, he willingly approached the unmarked police car and surrendered. The case seemed very clear at this point, but Greg Wang always felt there were some doubts. He repeatedly pondered the whole case. Although there were doubts, they could always be explained by Chase-Chen's answers. What he couldn't let go of was whether Chase-Chen had any accomplices, but he couldn't find any contradictions in Chen's answers, even under torture. If there really were no accomplices, wouldn't the interrogation yield nothing? In the afternoon, Dr. Chen brought the preliminary investigation report. "Boss, we found 2 small burnt hair segments in the iron barrel, which have been sent to the province for DNA testing, with results expected the day after tomorrow at the latest. Additionally, as you instructed, we also collected a small amount of hair from the corner of his room for DNA testing to see if there are any accomplices." Greg Wang nodded. "Good, make it quick." Greg Wang believed that as long as the test results did not match Chase-Chen himself, then his accomplice could no longer hide. Dr. Chen took out something resembling a medical record from his bag and handed it to Greg Wang. "What is this?" Greg Wang looked at it and saw it was all handwritten English letters, which he couldn't understand. "This is another set of psychological counseling records found in Chase-Chen's house." "What does it say?" Dr. Chen paused and said, "It says Chase-Chen has homosexual tendencies and needs psychological treatment." Greg Wang was shocked. "You're saying he's homosexual?" Dr. Chen shook his head. "Not exactly homosexual, but homosexual tendencies. There are 2 types of homosexuality, one is natural physiological, and the other is acquired psychological. It says he has psychological homosexual tendencies and suggests he undergo mental health treatment, which can be corrected." Greg Wang asked in confusion, "He's homosexual and sought a doctor to correct his abnormal psychology?" Dr. Chen said, "It's not necessarily that he sought a psychologist himself. I've consulted specialists, and this is a benefit many companies in the United States offer, providing psychological counseling for employees periodically. This is not a formal hospital diagnosis result, it's a record of conversations with a psychologist mentioning this point. Whether or not to accept treatment to correct homosexual psychology is his personal privacy, and the psychologist has no right to interfere." Greg Wang thought for a moment, puzzled. Chase-Chen had said Jasmine Gon was his girlfriend and that he loved her deeply. How could he be homosexual? Was he lying? This question needed further verification from their old classmates. Dr. Chen continued. "We searched his home laboratory and found various chemical instruments and remaining chemical materials, confirming our previous judgment. Nicotine, hydrogen cyanide, arsenic trioxide, including sodium metal and pure calcium carbonate, were all refined by him through chemical reactions. Besides these sensitive materials, other common raw materials like dilute sulfuric acid were purchased through regular channels. Since these materials are quite common and his purchase quantities were not large, plus he bought them in batches from different places outside the city, even some non-liquid materials were purchased online, so he never aroused any suspicion." Greg Wang nodded. "He is indeed talented in chemistry, having worked for many years in American chemical companies. It's a pity he used his skills in the wrong way." At that moment, Dr. Chen's expression darkened and said, "We've been testing the substances found in his house overnight, and besides what we knew, we discovered Chase-Chen also refined potassium cyanide, with a small amount of powder found in the material bottles. Additionally, we found about 30 grams of TNT. But according to his own purchase list records and the comparison with the remaining materials, he should have refined at least 100 grams of TNT, and the remaining part is missing. Moreover, we also found remaining detonator materials in the corner of the floor. Greg Wang was immediately alarmed. Hearing about TNT, he immediately thought of Jasmine Gan's crazy act, and now Chase Chen, an even crazier guy, was also making TNT. What was he planning to do? His murders never involved TNT, and this explosive, unlike his poison killings, requires making it into a bomb. To kill with TNT, one has to die with the victim at close range, just like Jasmine Gan sacrificed herself to blow up her enemy. And making a remote-controlled bomb is quite difficult. Chen's confession never mentioned he wanted to die together with his target. This news was very sudden, and Greg Wang knew this matter was of great importance. If Chase Chen indeed had an accomplice and that part of the TNT was in the accomplice's hands, then this accomplice doing something even crazier with that TNT would be disastrous. He couldn't delay, quickly sent Dr. Chen away, and hurried to the interrogation room. He must immediately find out the whereabouts of the remaining TNT. Now, whether or not they could torture Chase Chen for information, not knowing the whereabouts of the TNT was like having a time bomb beside them. Once something happened, it would be a big deal. As soon as Chase Chen was brought into the interrogation room and sat down, Greg Wang rushed over, grabbed his collar, and demanded coldly, "Tell me, what did you make the TNT for?"